Alright, so mini project 2, part 2. So let's look at that shop script again. I believe I didn't have to rush through too much, but I mean, basically what I was trying to say with the pan zoom script, just to make sure I got it, is that there's a flag variable in pan zoom that the shop script will toggle there to disable it, and that prevents panning and zooming while in the shop. And all of the touch scripts are instructed to reach out to the or to the pan zoom script and make sure that the user is not in the shop, because if the user is in the shop, we want to disable touch events to prevent nasty things like accidentally moving units, double shops, if that's even possible. The code, I haven't really looked at that and seen if that could happen. Doesn't really matter though, because touches are disabled, and that's why, just to prevent weird glitches like that. Plus, there's, moving their hand around the shop and they leave and they're in a completely different place. So this took quite a bit of work, especially this. I mean, I'd done a similar bit of logic when I built a Minesweeper over the summer with like Windows Forms and Visual C#. But it was more of a Unity way, and then I'm dealing with, instead of just a pure array, I'm looking at a naming convention that simulates kind of an array style of organization. So that definitely made it a little bit trickier to some degree. So what we've got here, and this code will probably be cleaned up a lot as I have to come back to it and revisit it, but we reference the what I call the castle tile, which is just the castle, or the tile that's underneath the castle. And now we have a array of game objects called tiles, and this is going to hold the tiles around the game object, or around the castle tile. Now, I didn't get far enough to get an actual unit spawning, just because the whole, basically all my effort was just spent on creating a functional UI and GUI, but it's definitely set up and ready to go, and that's what this whole bit is just that's something that I've added in there, and this is for whenever I do get into instantiating, that's how you pronounce it, but just creating new instances of my different units, game objects, because I'm going to learn about, I think they're called prefabs in Unity, something like that, but nevertheless, this is an array that will hold all of the game objects, which are all the tiles around the castle tile. Now, I decided to use this logic instead of getting into raycast, because raycasts are just weird. And it's easier and more efficient anyways to do it with the logic. But what we do, this is going to hold the canvas game object right here, so canvas, and what we're going to do now, we are going to reference the, I say we're referencing the curtain. We're referencing the mesh renderer on the curtain, not the curtain game object itself. We're wanting that mesh renderer component, because that's going to let us toggle its visibility. Now what we're going to do, we're going to reference the canvas here. So well, that's actually an interesting thing I ran into. I tried to do that up here, but then it kept saying it couldn't find the object, even though I knew I'd spelled it right. So I figured out what's happening is that when up here in the class level, you can't actually search for the objects. Now maybe I'm just doing it wrong, but that's what I found to be true, is that it wouldn't work for me. So I just came down here, I would create the class variable, I would declare the variable up here so it's class level, and then I would give it a value right here, and I would reference the specific objects. So we find the canvas game object, and we also find the curtain game object, but then we ask for its mesh renderer component. Now what we're going to do at the very start, and this is when the game is loaded, because this script is loaded at whenever that happens, it's going to hide the canvas, which hides the shop user interface. It's going to hide the curtain, which is disabled by default in the editor, but just in case, it were, if maybe I were to not have it disabled, that's just, that way this will always work. So it will disable the visibility, or it will make the curtain invisible. Now we'll reference the castle's tile, and right here, I got into trying to use raycast to do this, but that got a little odd. For some reason it wasn't really picking them up. I think it was hitting maybe the castle above it. I may have needed to turn off the, like I added it to an ignore raycast layer or something like that. But at the time I didn't know about that, so I just decided to just manually enter the game object or the name of that castle tile, because I mean castles, as far as my plans for the game now, just I mean if I were to have fun with it and or well have even more fun with it, because I'm having fun with it now, but if I were to have even more fun with it and develop it into like a full-fledged giant mobile TBS game, I might want to add in the ability for a user to add in to like create castles and advance their territory over much larger maps. But as of now, like this scope right here, they're not gonna be able to create new castles. So the castle is always going to be wherever I place it. So that means I can also just decide, hey, this is your tiles. And just to simplify and prevent the amount of lost the word for it, but just to simplify the amount of things that I'm just typing in on my own, I used all this logic here to find the tiles around it by manipulating the name of the tile. So I think they're well, anyways, so right here I reference the game object, reference the castle tile. I lose my mind. Let's see. So then I would get I create a string here called castle tile name, and that's equal to the castle tile's name. So it's in the name there, no pun intended. But that way it's easy to work with, so I don't have to just say castle tile.name. But then we've got a array of strings called coordinates, and what I do is I split the name of the castle tile right here into using the underscore. So I'm going to get each of these individual numbers here. So it's coordinates. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to parse those and get the individual, the row number and the column number. That way I can look at this more mathematically. So then basically what I do, I'm not going to go over every single one of these, but because they all work pretty much the same way. But I check to see if such a tile exists, because if this were on an edge, then there's the possibility that I would try to reach out, that I would try to find an object that didn't exist, and that would throw an error and crash the game. So that would not be a good idea. So I decided not to do that, or at least I think it would break this particular script. So I have to decide, does it exist? So I just use that, thinking about a grid and its coordinates, and if I subtracted 1 from it, if I go to the left, is there going to be a tile to the left? So basically, is that greater than or equal to 0? Which, since they're all whole numbers, I decided to say greater than -1, since there's not really a greater than or equal to operator. So if the tile exists, then I add that tile to the tiles array, and I use that just by GameObject.find, and then I just combine the two the row number and the column number, and they're separated by an underscore. And that's how that works there. And of course, if there were no tile that exists, then it would just be the default value of that array, which is just null. And whenever I get into actually using this, I'll be able to check for whether or not it's equal to null, and that will let me know, whether or not to do anything with that, and that'll prevent errors. So that covers all that there. And now we come down here to our update function. So if the castle's tile is selected, so if the user touches the castle, if the user's not already in the shop, so that right there we actually look at, it's kind of funny, we look at another script's public variable to tell whether or not we should continue here. And what this tells us, has the shop already been displayed? Should we do this again? That way, it wouldn't be game breaking, but this would be inefficient because those lines of code would just get run over and over and over unnecessarily. So if the shop's not been displayed yet, we display the canvas, which is the GUI. We show the curtain to hide the map, and then we disable pan zoom. And I put a lengthy note in here so I would remember that also disables all of the touch scripts. So we set this equal to true, and that lets us know that we're in the shop, and it's kind of like do not disturb. So that's kind of how that works. So it's just like a do not disturb sign. So right here we reference the buttons on the shop canvas. So that's the exit button and the by night button. The by night button doesn't actually do anything yet, but it's definitely there, and I've scripted it so that the code within it runs. It's actually a debug.log statement that will show up on the console. But nevertheless here, so if we come down here, if the user has touched the exit button, so we'll have to go look at those scripts. They're really basic, and they're basically the same for both the exit and buy button. There's that importer that was bothering me earlier. If we go over here, I'm going to get the shop exit button and the shop by night button. Alright, so right here, these basically work just like they did on the start scene, or start screen scene. So there's a public flag variable here that tells us whether or not the user has touched the exit button, basically whether or not it's been touched. So it's set to false initially, but if they do touch the button, this method here will be called, and it will set that equal to true. And then that tells our shop script here that's looking at that public variable on the exit button. It's like, okay, now it's been touched, so we're going to run this bit of code. But the funny thing is, this only needs to run once, because otherwise this would run infinitely. And I actually had that happen, and it would you would click the exit button and you would see it flash, and then that was it. And it would flash, and you would see the map for a second, and then it would just go back. Or at that point I hadn't even hidden the map, but I couldn't get out of the shop. So this right here tells it, okay, now the exit button's not touched anymore. And what we do here, we hide the canvas. So this is when we're going to leave the shop. So we hide the canvas, we hide the shop GUI. Then we re-enable pan zoom, which consequently will re-enable all of our touch scripts. And then we also deselect the castle's tile right here. That way, actually that's what got me. I remembered this, but I didn't deselect the castle's tile. And the crucial thing is that up here, if the castle's tile is selected, we go into this. So it's just this recursive kind of thing, and you just can't get out of it. So you have to deselect the tile, and I just use the touch actions method, deselect it. And right here now, we hide the curtain, and we just set curtain not enabled equal to false. And this is the by night click event here. It works basically the exact same way. The only thing is we don't have to worry about deselecting the castle's tile, and that doesn't do anything yet. So that brings up, I can't remember if I mentioned this in the part 1 video, but I was initially going to try to do the GUI and the unit movement in one fell swoop there and get it all. But I figured out both of them are a real beast to work on, because the GUI, the further I got into it, the larger and deeper it got, and unit movement's the same way. So there's going to be a massive amount of work that's going to go into actually implementing a system to move units and attack other units. I could have done a basic system where it would have just rendered them above a tile and moved them around, but it would have been, I would have just had to throw that away later, because it's going to require a really well organized system to do unit movement, because that's going to have to be linked into attacks and things. But that should wrap up the code portion of the video. I believe that's only got a few seconds left, but I will go ahead and pick this back up with the gameplay video, and we'll look at how this looks on a cell phone.